It's my pleasure to chair this next session, which is on mental health in the workplace. A really important topic, as we've talked about mental health over the last couple of days as being a very important area that we need to explore more deeply, and this is our opportunity to get some preliminary thoughts, and then we'll discuss it in the last bit of this presentation. And we have a really amazing panel who will be giving very short presentations from their various perspectives. Our first presenter is Nitika Rawari. Nitika is the Manager of Research, Evaluation, and Knowledge Translation, Prevention and Promotion in Workplaces at the Mental Health Commission of Canada. And I will just leave your bio at that. If you want to add a few sentences as well, that would be great. We don't have a PowerPoint for your presentation, so if you want to sit
Absolutely.
there, you're good. Okay, take it away then, Nitika. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a great pleasure for me to be here today and to discuss this important topic of inclusion and involvement in employment for people living with a mental illness in Canada. But before I begin, I can't start any speech without acknowledging that the land in which we gather today is the traditional unceded Algonquin territory. I would also like to thank Maureen and Emil for their gracious invitation to the conference and for me to be a part of this esteemed panel. I can say with great confidence that anyone you hear from here today has been experts in the field, don't count me in it, but all of these individuals and others have been great experts, and it's just been wonderful to work with all of them and over the years as well. The value of employment for the maintenance and improvement of mental health is clearly and widely understood. It won't be surprising to you when I say that employment is not only a source of a paycheck, but also provides people with a sense of purpose, opportunities to learn and contribute to the society. But the story is quite different for people living with a mental illness. We know that individuals living with a mental illness are much less likely to be employed. In fact, for those living with a severe mental illness, in some cases, unemployment rates are up to 90%. This situation is exacerbated even further when you consider the impact of stigma and discrimination. In fact, 60% of people living with mental illness do not disclose it with the fear of being labeled. We heard this morning about the recent Canadian Survey on Disability, which highlighted the impact of youth even further, stating that among youth, mental health problems and illnesses are the most common type of disability. Young Canadians are the future of our country, so it's time we paid attention to our system at an individual and systemic level. But before going any further, I love stories, so I want to share a story with you about my friend Bob. I met Bob many, many moons ago. I'm not going to age myself. But on the surface, he was always a very radiant and full of life young fellow who was an inspiration to myself and many others. We studied together, shared many courses together. Upon graduation, we lost touch, but about 5 years ago, a chance occurrence got us back together. The only difference was that I was at a job center in my capacity as an employee of the Mental Health Commission of Canada and wanting to collaborate with them for a project. But Bob was there, on the other hand, to seek help, to get back to work and support his family, while facing his multiple health issues, including depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. Now, I began this story by telling you that Bob has always been, from what I remember many moons ago, a radiant and vibrant fellow. So what happened? I later learned that he suffered from mental illness even when I knew him, but he masked his symptoms so well. He did not seek treatment, and when he did want to seek treatment, his family did not understand his suffering and urged him to suck it up, buttercup, which he continued to do. Bob's story is unfortunately not unique and continues to persist among Canadians. In fact, our country spends approximately $28.8 billion each year in disability income support, 1/3 of which is used to support Canadians living with mental illness. Those who are at work are not immune to suffering either. In fact, in any given week, 500,000 Canadians employed are unable to go to work. These are not people who are accounted for who don't go to work but call it a backache or a headache. This does not even include people who go to work but are not fully there. We call that presenteeism. Or individuals who never could get work or are in and out of the workforce because of their mental illness and what happens because of that, and employers not understanding and accommodating their needs. This is a challenge that has solutions, but the solution cannot be implemented by one person or in one day. These solutions require a collective effort from individuals, employers, service providers, and at all levels of government, caregivers, to name a few. The Canadian Strategy for Disability in Work attempts to do just that, in my opinion. Having a stable and adequate income, safe and affordable housing, access to health and social services, support of family and friends, secure employment, and livable communities and dependable transportation are just some of the important determinants of health and mental health. Although there's a general social trend towards inclusivity, there are a number of barriers that continue to impede the full integration and acceptance of persons with mental illness to gain income and employment. Their skills are not recognized, stigma and discrimination continue to be persistent. People's beliefs that individuals living with a mental illness may be harmful or may be violent or may not be able to perform job duties, etc. So the Commission has worked over many years, over the last 10 years, to develop national strategies and frameworks like the National Standard for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace, and provided tools and resources for employers and research that shows what are the evidence-based best practices. We continue to work with service providers to continue to understand what those promising practices are and share them at a national level. We also work in the social enterprise sector because that is a very, very valuable stream of work and employment that we need to consider and give opportunities for social entrepreneurs to grow and be able to give employment opportunities for people living with mental illness. We also need to make sure that we are continuing to work with people living with mental illness so they can design what they need best and they can provide input into it. The concept of universal design that was included in the disability strategy was extremely, extremely valuable. And I do agree with everything that was included in the strategy. The only hope that I have is that what we talk about today in the panel is how do we implement that? And who's accountable for what? I consider the concept of voluntary action very, very meaningful. But I do hope that we continue to talk about who's going to urge that voluntary action. What is going to be that one body of organization or a group of people who are going to be leading us through that path? So thank you so much for inviting me today.
Thank you, Nitika. Our next presenter is Candace Seller. She's the Program Manager of Worker and Public Safety Standards at the CSA Group.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Candace. Emil invited me here today to try and make the world of standards exciting to 400 people. No small task, and I think I have 15 minutes to do it. I have been with the Canadian Standards Association for 11 years. Obviously, I'm very passionate about standards and I believe in it. I've worked across the organization in a lot of different technical areas, and I'm a firm believer in the value. We have been developing standards since 1919, so next year is our 100th anniversary. So 100 years, I think we've kind of got it down pat. We know what we're doing. We've had the pleasure of working with a lot of organizations from many, many different areas throughout that 100-year span. So, as I mentioned, we're celebrating our 100 years. A lot of people are operating under the misunderstanding, even within the government. You have no idea how many times I go into a government office and I'm told, well, you're government. I'm like, no, I'm not government. We're a third-party, not-for-profit membership association, and our members don't pay dues or fees like some standards development organizations do. For example, it seems to be the pay-to-play model that's used in the States. Our members are around the table because they come to the table to participate. And as long as they come with the right attitude, the right knowledge, the willingness to participate and being engaged and be respectful of everyone around the table, then they can be there and they're a member of the larger association as well. So we're dedicated to safety, social good, and sustainability. I can go into each of those in detail, but I only have a little bit of time today. And as I mentioned earlier, we cover 54 different technology areas. Last year, we had the honor of having Peter Mansbridge present at our annual general meeting. And he said that CSA, everybody knows CSA. It's the mark on their toaster or their toilet or their plumbing devices. He goes, nobody knows what it means, but they know that they trust you. So we're in the background. Everybody trusts us, but nobody knows what we do. So I have 5 minutes, apparently, to tell you what that is. So we do develop independent, third-party, consensus-based documents, and they're developed by the people in the room. We have best practices as well as minimum standards, and it really depends on where the topic is in the spectrum. Like if you're just starting out with a new technology and you have to set minimum practices, or you've been fairly in a topic for quite some time, and you're at a point where you actually want to set a much higher bar and you aim for best practice standards. A lot of our standards are referenced in regulation. They are voluntary documents unless they are referenced in regulation. And in my particular program, and I'm going to jump forward, we have 150 standards on the occupational health and safety side alone, and of those, 70% are referenced. That's either direct references, which can be ambulatory, which means the government bodies have such faith in the work that comes out of the technical committees that they don't even need to change the edition number. They know that what's going to come out is right for that solution. We have references that actually specify the specific edition because they want to make sure they're comfortable every time a new edition comes out that it aligns with regulatory needs. And then there's other cases where the regulators take the text we've created and they adopt it directly as the wording into regulation. So this accounts for currently 6,000 references in provincial regulations and 612 in federal. We have a public view access site, so anybody can go, and any standard that's referenced in regulation is free for anybody to view. Now, in terms of accessibility of that site, we're working on it. There's some few issues still outstanding, but we anticipate having it fully compliant to the latest standards by about March. So I have 59 technical committees under this one arm, and we have over 1,800 volunteer experts. Those are people actively at the table at any given time. So who participates on these committees? It's anybody, everybody in the room. Maybe by show of hands, is there anybody here who has participated or is going to be participating soon on a CSA committee? See, we're the best kept secret. I tell you, it's not restricted to Canadians, and this is on purpose because we'd like to say our standards are developed by Canadians for Canadians, but quite often we look to international expertise because there may be, there may be an absence of knowledge in Canada in that particular area. I don't think it's the case in this particular subject from what I'm seeing in the room today. We have a very involved process. I have 2 minutes, so I'm not going to go through it. But what you need to know from this multicolored box that's barely legible, I did not create this, is that the actual committee part of the process really should be the whole page. It's where the people come together and meeting after meeting after meeting, they hash out the wording. And everybody has a voice at that table. It's a balanced committee, which means that there's no one voice dominating. So you have regulators, you have user interest, which it can include labor, it can include consumers, it can include lived experience. You have employers, you have regulators, and you have general interest, which traditionally includes your academic and your research-based. And those are the voices that come to the table. CSA doesn't write the standards. We facilitate the process that we've refined over 100 years in developing those standards. So how do you get involved? Well, there's multiple ways to participate in the Canadian standards system. And although we are a not-for-profit and we're a third party, we are accredited by the Standards Council of Canada, and we're audited annually to make sure that we're following our rules to develop standards that are acceptable to the Canadian marketplace. So there's various ways you can get involved, and I've listed them on the slide, but I'd also happily speak to anybody after the fact, and Emile also knows how to get a hold of me. but it can be as passive as following our community board, and we have work on there that's probably relevant to the existing audience. You can actually participate in and actually conduct research. CSA has a research arm that we invest in from a social good perspective to explore areas where we feel that standards need to be better defined. You can provide direct input through standards development activities. So there's all sorts of different ways, and all of our documents go out for public review, and that's an opportunity for, if you don't have the time or the ability to get to a meeting or participate in a meeting, then you can still provide feedback into the process. So I'm just going to quickly highlight the documents that I think would be relevant to this group, just to give you a taste of what we're working on. We have 2 different standards under ergonomics. These are published, with the most recent one being published in December of last year. The nice thing about that publication was, historically, ergonomics was approached, the back of the standard, there was a table that anybody could apply and sort of typify and classify the individual. We've thrown that table out, because ergonomics is an individual experience, and the solution needs to be an individual solution. So you're not going to find those tables anymore. It's quite a revolutionary change to how the topic of ergonomics is addressed. As Nitika mentioned, psychological health and safety, which actually has multiple arms to it at this point. We're about to kick off a standard on workplace disability prevention management systems, working with Emil and his crew. And we have a document that's underway on worker impairment. There was a research project done on this topic. It's published online for everyone to look at. The seed document's developed, and we're just moving into the call for participant stage. Worker fatigue and violence and harassment. These are all topics that interplay with everything that you guys are talking about today. And this is under what we call our worker wellness portfolio. CSA obviously has greater involvement in other areas as well. For those of you that are familiar with it, the B651 standards, which are our accessible design for the built environment. We just published a new version of B651 on November 30th. So that committee worked really hard to get it out there with new implementation guidance. And there's a lot of interest from the different federal entities in actually making regulatory references to that document, which is a first and a win, because we've been trying to get that recognized for many, many years. So I'm going to wrap it up there because I'm over, and I'm going to hand it off to Emil.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Candace. Okay, so our next presenter is Don Palmer. He's the Executive Director at Causeway Work Center, which is a community development organization that's been providing supported employment services for persons living with mental health challenges. Take it away, Don.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to play the role of the grumpy old white guy on this panel. I've been doing this work, working with folks with mental illness, helping them find employment for 26 years. So, I'm a practitioner, and I'm primarily interested in action and making sure that people with mental illness are able to find work. So that's going to be a focus of a lot of what I want to talk about, some of the challenges we face, and some of the ways we can potentially overcome a few of them. In the previous panel, we heard about some of the surveys that have provided us with a variety of information that we can use towards drafting policies to help improve employment opportunities for folks. But, data for the sake of data is just that. It's great for academics, no offense, Rebecca, but for the rest of us, it's just that. We need to be able to do something with that data. So, statistics aside, we know that unemployment rates or underemployment rates for folks with mental health challenges or severe mental illness are extremely high. Whether it's 70% or 80% or somewhere in between doesn't really matter. It's problematic, and we have to do something about it. We also know that one of the biggest barriers facing successful work outcome is fear surrounding those living with mental health challenges and mental illness. And I choose not to use the word stigma because it's really fear. It's fear on behalf of, on the part of people with mental illness, fearing that they're going to have to disclose and be identified, and it's fear on the part of employers as to what constitutes mental health challenges or mental illness. These barriers can be matched with a lack of understanding around the accommodations required to ensure successful work outcomes. The third pillar in the Canadian strategy we've been discussing for the past 2 days centers around building effective partnerships. But we need to be able to transfer that into practical application. I've cherry-picked a few of the key challenges and barriers contained in the strategy that, from my perspective, I see as being of major significance. First, I picked the aspect of service agencies and support to businesses. So, if resources are available to both job seekers and employers, are they being underutilized? And how does one access them? There are organizations like Causeway around the country with the competency to support both disabled job seekers and employers. Causeway's been around for 40 years, and we've facilitated hundreds of individuals to return to work, and we've supported their employers as well. But are there enough dedicated resources out there? And I would say no, they're not. And I'll give you an example. For instance, here in Ontario, an inventory of employment and education services released in May of 2018 by Addictions and Mental Health Ontario identified 38 organizations, of which I estimate only 22 focus on providing dedicated and comprehensive supported employment services to persons with mental illness and their employers. That represents access to comprehensive supported employment services to just over 2,000 individuals in this province. I guess I'm going to have to speak faster. Other provincial ministries do provide programs for folks with disabilities, but they're not focused on individuals with mental illness. And although there's a strong body of research identifying evidence-based or best practices models of supported employment for people with mental health challenges, too often government funders choose to ignore the research and to fund their own variations that are both less comprehensive and less effective. I suggest we need to develop a national database listing both evidence-based service delivery models, something the Mental Health Commission is working on, as well as a database of supported employment providers that is easily accessible to employers and to people with mental health challenges looking to find work. 1 minute. Ooh. Another identified challenge that causes me concern is school-to-work transition. My concern specifically relates to secondary education. There are few, if any, substantial links between the educational services to students with mental health challenges and the adult employment service sector. Youth, we heard this morning from Gail that youth graduating from school but not yet in employment represented about 100,000 individuals. These are essentially two different worlds. High school graduates wishing to work rather than move on to post-secondary education are often poorly prepared for a lifetime of work by the time they leave high school and find themselves languishing on waiting lists for months, waiting to access adult services. That hand means stop, but I'm going to keep going. And, you know, I want to comment on the strategy as it refers to the barriers by provincial federal jurisdictions. I was struck yesterday by the fact that there was nobody on that panel from the province of Ontario. Last time I looked, we were in Ottawa, which I believe is in Ontario. So I was struck by the fact that we had folks from just about every other province. As a service provider, I often feel we take 3 steps forward and 2 steps backwards. Provincially, I believe we do a poor job of removing disincentives for people on disability income wishing to return to work. We are so fearful of people gaming the system that as individuals start to work more hours and earn more income, we take such a large percentage of their earnings away from them, there's little incentive to go back to work. While recent changes in this province will allow individuals on ODSP to earn up to $6,000 annually without a penalty, after that $6,000 ceiling, or $500 a month, they are only permitted to keep 25 cents on every dollar earned. So this is the equivalent of, earning $3.50 per hour for somebody on minimum wage, for those hitting that $6,000 threshold. To me, this is reminiscent of the old sheltered workshop system where you got cigarette money. So we need to get beyond this. While $6,000 level without penalty may represent a slight improvement in the previous system, the wage clawback is a powerful disincentive to people wishing to return to work. In closing, I do want to cite some very positive decisions that our federal government has been making recently that will affect workplace integration for persons living with mental illness. The recent announcement in the fall economic statement of a $50 million investment in a readiness stream for social enterprise is fabulous news. Social enterprise has proven to be a very effective way to employ persons with mental health challenges, and more particularly for persons living with a more severe mental illness who may experience difficulty moving into mainstream employment. I believe if you can't find somebody a job, you need to build one for them. And that's a good way to define social enterprise. No one left behind. I believe this investment on the part of the federal government will allow the sector to grow significantly over the next few years and to create hundreds of new jobs for persons living with mental illness. The federal government's commitment to social procurement policy will also increase revenue opportunities for social enterprise by making it easier for them to bid on government tenders. And community benefit agreements affecting large infrastructure projects funded by the federal government will increase employment access for designated groups such as persons with disabilities. Almost done. But social procurement is not solely the responsibility of government. We need the private sector to review how they can increase employment opportunities for vulnerable individuals by adding a social value lens to their current procurement strategies. We have also seen both PSPC, PSC, and ESDC launch pilot projects in the National Capital Region to increase employment opportunities for designated groups, of which persons with disabilities are one. So clearly good things are happening, but we still have much to do, so let's keep the dialogue going. Thank you.
Thank you. Clearly, this topic needs a lot more airtime, and hopefully we can keep the discussion going after the formal presentations. So our last presenter is Rebecca Gevirtz. She's an associate professor in the School of Rehabilitation at McMaster University, and she'll just speak to the series of presentations we just heard about and taking a lens from a research academic perspective.
Yeah, so I won't talk too long because I think we want some time for questions. And I think everyone on the panel has really summarized some key issues in the field. And, when I think about the issue of employment for people with mental illness, really this is a large issue in the larger disability work strategy. And I'm really glad it got a panel to itself because lots of people with disabilities, mental illness is part of their experience, and we talk about that intersectionality. Mental illness is the primary disabling issue for many, and for many it's part of the story. We also know that mental illness, like many other disabling conditions, often has that episodic course. And what we're learning actually is that many disabilities are episodic. Mental illness isn't the only one. And that's, I've heard numbers, depending on how you define episodic disability, it can be as high as 80% of people with disabilities have some sort of an episodic experience, meaning that when they answer the question, can you work, their answer is sometimes, depending on the conditions at work. And what that means, actually, it's really significant, because what that means is that when you think about our policy structures for people with disabilities who either can or can't work, it's really based on disability being a stable state. And I think we are all learning that that is not the case. Okay, so we have these policy structures that don't work for many people with disabilities. And as a result, we really need to change those policy structures. So I'm going to just talk for a couple minutes. I want to build on this issue of fear, because the issue of fear is significant, and it's an issue in the workplace, and it's an issue outside of the workplace. So when you think about what it would take for somebody with a mental illness or an other episodic disability to say, I'm gonna take a chance and try employment, I'm gonna start working, I've been collecting social assistance benefits, and I'm feeling like I want to go to work. What would it take for someone to get to that point? I think what it takes, what we're learning from the research, is that people need to believe that if it doesn't work out, that they can go back and be protected. And what we have now is states where if you've shown that you can work, it becomes harder to get back on work. And that people don't understand exactly what's going to happen to their income. And there's lots of risks involved. So really we need benefits that allow people to seamlessly move between employment and unemployment as their disability condition changes. The last thing I'm going to point out is workplace strategies. And I've had the privilege of working closely with NIDICA and the Mental Health Commission of Canada and Emile Tampa to look at workplace strategies that are supportive of people with mental illness. And what we know is that the most powerful strategies are often low cost or no cost. And that when you're thinking about how to accommodate someone with a mental illness, you often have to think about beyond accommodation, like we've been talking about, how to build an inclusive workplace that is supportive of people who have different needs. So it's a lot about creating flexibility on how people work, where people work, when people work, and creating supports and benefits for people so that they have options. And we know when I speak to rooms full of people, HR professionals, many of the strategies that we talk about in our report that's available at the Mental Health Commission of Canada website, many of those strategies are really just good HR practices, how to create a good workplace, a healthy workplace for everybody. So perhaps I'll just leave it at that for now. And turn it back to Emile.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for the lovely summary. Thank you, everybody. That was excellent. We are now going to open it up for questions to the audience. And just put up your hand so we'll see who. Well, Steve has his hand raised up way back there, so maybe he can start off the session. Oh, was there somebody else as well? Okay, up there. Okay, keep that in mind.
Thank you so much for the perspective from all the panelists. It's Steve Mantis with the Ontario Network of Injured Workers Groups. I wonder too about the piece of prevention. Like, how do we create systems that don't cause mental health problems? And for injured workers, we've done some studies, and folks with a permanent impairment from a workplace injury, of course, we heard this morning 25% of us are in that boat. 45% of us end up depressed. And we believe it's because how the system works that is supposed to support people. I see the same thing in terms of our social assistance programs in Ontario. The systems are set up with this idea that you're all a bunch of cheaters, that we have to monitor you to make sure you're really disabled. So we have to suppress oftentimes our own desire to overcome our abilities to be able to maintain the link to income support so we can feed our families. And it drives us crazy. I mean, I can tell you myself, I lost my arm 40 years ago. Other parts of my body are deteriorating, and I go for therapy. And the compensation says, no, we're not going to pay for it. I'm at a crisis stage where I can't pull up my socks and tuck in my shirt, and they're telling me, we won't help you anymore. Well, I lost it. But why is it the systems that are supposed to help people are making us sick? What do we do about that?
Does anybody want to try to respond?
Maybe I'll
Nick,
start
Rebecca.
quickly by commenting that I absolutely agree with you, Steve, around prevention and support being such a critical part in all of our systems that we need to embed. The work that the Commission's done goes a long way for workplaces to continue to identify how do you support all employees, including the ones who have a mental illness, so that all employees are aware that, well, we all have mental health. And how do we continue to promote that mental health and continue to support employees in a workplace so that they know that they can seek help before it gets too late? The issue I feel currently we have, and we're also developing a strategy and framework with the Canadian Standards Association for post-secondary students to continue to figure out how do you support students on a campus and off campus to prevent and promote and then support when it's needed. The issue I find goes to the crux also at the policy level, where we only recognize you when you have a disability or when you are within the framework of disability which is diagnosed. We do not recognize individuals if they are struggling. We do not recognize individuals in the system if they just want to have a conversation and seek supports that will prevent them from getting a diagnosis. I think that's a really critical conversation to be had at different levels within the system, including all levels of government. So thank you for sharing that.
Can I add, sorry?
Oh, sorry,
that?
Ruth, do you want to
Just
respond?
really briefly.
Okay.
There's a lot of talk at different tables around this idea of wraparound supports to help people get a job. And I think that focus is really nice. I think in Ontario, I don't have a good sense of what that wraparound supports would be. And from the research, I think what we can say is that wraparound support needs to address what Steve highlighted. It needs to include having a skilled service provider who can sit down and talk about employment and help the individual think about what kind of job would be the right job for you, what would be the things that you would bring to the table, and what kind of education and what kind of skills and experiences can you offer, what would you need for that work to be successful. And so we need to make sure that those kinds of supports are in place when we're helping people who are on benefit systems, rather than this policing approach that we have.
Just before the next question, Candice wants to add to that as well.
Yeah, I'm just going to add something from the sort of the standards world lens, particularly on the OSH side. There's been a movement, if some of you have had the opportunity of hearing Andrew Harkness from WSPS present, for OSH professionals that are implementing or maintaining or continuously improving management systems within their organization, to start including in their risk profiles mental harm, to actually go into the workplace, and along with looking at the chemical risks and potential to cut yourselves on different type of machinery, looking at the culture within the organization from a mental harm lens. So it's bringing the HR and the OSH world together. It's being led by the OSH professionals, and it's a different twist, but it's a nice trend to see, because it doesn't necessarily just rely on the employee who may be struggling or on the verge of having an episode, if it happens to be an episodic illness, to self-declare. There could be peers around them that are constantly, as part of the culture of occupational health and safety in the workplace, keeping an eye out for things that they can identify that could be harmful to others. If they see episodes where people are bullying, if they see episodes where maybe there's an unhealthy management-employee relationship, it doesn't rely on the individual to pull all that bravery up right from their socks and self-declare, but it creates more of a community approach to mental harm reduction in the workplace. So I just wanted to share that.
Just one quick thing, too, is you can't have good mental health without having good physical health. So promoting those two are really critical. I know in our program we have a full-time gym with a full-time personal trainer so that we keep our people healthy, and we do a lot of nutritional counseling as well. So remember, physical health and mental health go hand in hand.
Good morning. My name is Joanne Hearns. Like Steve Manis, I'm with the Ontario Network of Injured Workers. He said quite a bit of my story, different but the same. I wanted to comment more than anything. So I really, really love the comment about the transfer from school to work. Injured workers are often deemed as employable. For us, that means we are told you can work. We are cut off our benefits, and we are actually forced either into poverty or to work. So for me, my story, I mean, it's taken me 5 years, but I have slowly gotten myself to the capacity where I believe that next year I may consider actually believe that I could work full-time. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. The comments that I've heard today about the mental illness being the primary disability, like Steve said, we didn't start out having mental disabilities when we got physically injured. And it's something that we don't get any supports on. And we have to learn to help ourselves and advocate. I advocated with WSIB to get a Bachelor of Social Work. But when I was finished all of that, I wasn't mentally capable of advocating for the employment. And so I just wanted to sort of say that to the panel. I really did enjoy your comments, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. And I think that's all the time we have, because we have to move on to the next session. We're already over time by a few minutes. So the panel members will be available to ask questions to, during the lunch break and this afternoon. So do take advantage of their being around to if you have some additional questions for them. I want to thank the panel. It was a great session. Thank you all for participating in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.